Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is so good to see everybody here again tonight. We had a great session last night. John, it was really good. We heard some fabulous stories, and so I think there's lots of folks that are looking to you to round it out with the research side of the equation. So, friends, Dr. John Ogrodniczuk is a professor of psychiatry and director of the UBC Psychotherapy Program. His research program focuses on a variety of psychotherapies in patient populations with a particular focus on personality disorders and men's mental health. And you can correct me if this is old news, because I have pulled up an older one. He's a past president of the North American chapter of the International Society for Psychotherapy Research. And most importantly, the founder of HeadsUpGuys, a leading global resource that provides tips, tools, information about professional services and recovery stories to help men fight depression and prevent suicide. Dr. Ogrodniczuk, welcome, and I will let you do your thing, and I'm here if you need me.
Oh, thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. I really appreciate being invited to share our resource, and I'm going to share my screen right now. There we go. And I'm going to assume that's working, and Mike, you can let me know if it's not.
You're good.
Alrighty. So I'm going to share some slides. Not too many, because I'm hoping there's also a conversation, but I wanted to take this opportunity to share with you folks about a men's mental health resource that we developed about 7.5 years ago now, in response to a pretty serious issue that's occurring with guys' health, and it's regarding suicide. Suicide is actually one of the leading causes of death in Canada, but if you drill down into the statistics a little bit more carefully, what you'll find is an absolutely enormous sex disparity between men and women when it comes to death by suicide. And as you can see in this bar figure on the left of your screen, there's a real large discrepancy between the suicide rate amongst men versus women, which starts in fact in the early teen years. And I'll switch over to that right now. If you look across the lifespan, what you'll find is that beginning in those early teen years, there is an enormous disparity between men and women with regard to death by suicide. And in fact, men account for approximately 75%, 3/4 of suicide deaths across Canada. And in fact, for men under the age of 50, suicide is actually the second leading cause of death. And this isn't just a Canadian phenomenon. This is actually occurring across most parts of the globe. And what we know from research on suicide and broader mental health research is that the highest rates of suicide are actually associated with depressive disorders. And in particular, we know that not reaching out for help with depression actually puts men at greatly heightened risk for suicide. So guys do get depressed. They usually don't seek help. Depression is a beastly illness to deal with, where you really ought not to try to deal with it on your own. You do need supports by your side to help you through that. And if those supports aren't in place, often what happens is that the depression becomes more severe, more chronic. And for a lot of guys, the depths of their despair is so great that they look to death as the only possible way to end their pain. And sadly, that happens for far too many men. And so what we realized is that male-oriented resources are needed to target a lot of the upstream factors that put guys at very high risk for suicide. So that's concerning depression, as I mentioned, but there's a small handful of the other factors that we know contribute to that risk as well. Low mental health literacy, meaning, what are people's awareness of illnesses like depression? Can they identify it in others or in themselves? If they do identify it in themselves, do they know where to seek help and find helpful resources? There's also high self-stigma, meaning how you perceive yourself as somebody who may be struggling with depression. And finally, there's low help seeking. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of guys just don't reach out for help when they need it. And so to try to address these various factors, we launched Heads Up Guys in 2015, June 2015 to be specific, to help fill this gap. There was absolutely nothing out there for guys in the mental health space, and specifically with regard to depression and suicide. So we wanted to try to develop a public health resource to start filling this gap. And indeed, this is a free resource. You do not have to pay for it, and it's supported entirely from donations from the public, which I'm proud to say. So this is the main website homepage for Heads Up Guys. We wanted this to be distinctly masculine. We wanted guys, when they came here, to really understand this is about them, it's for them, it's by men, and to really communicate, even just with imagery, this place is for you as a man. We took a lot of care to have, just plain language as much as possible, devoid of medical jargon, to make it accessible. We wanted the information that we provided to be accessible in another way, whereby we kind of layer the information, understanding that when guys are really struggling with depression, concentration is often really compromised. And sometimes you have maybe just a couple of minutes to take things in before you just can't take anything more. And so if you come to our site, we're hoping to be able to impart some useful information, even if you have only a couple of minutes to really engage. As I mentioned, the aesthetics, the imagery, we wanted to be male friendly. And there is a specific intention that we had to try to make this appealing to young guys as much as we can, wanting to catch men as early as possible to change that trajectory that I was talking about, where suicide is such a prevalent cause of death for men across the lifespan. So we thought, if we could aim at this more toward the younger group, 35 and under, then hopefully we can catch men early enough. The site's separated into four main sections, if you will. The first one is the part where we address mental health literacy, as I mentioned earlier. We talk about what depression actually looks like, the symptoms. We have a standardized screening tool that we call the self-check that we encourage men to take and really get a temperature check, if you will, on their mental health. We address the topic of suicide head on, understanding that a lot of men, when they struggle with depression, are also confronted with thoughts of suicide. And this is actually a pretty normal aspect of the illness. Yet for somebody, especially when they're first experiencing those kind of thoughts, it's terribly frightening. So we want to acknowledge that and support guys who are encountering those kinds of thoughts in their head, that maybe it's just better not if I'm here, that kind of thing. We talk about various risk factors, and finally we have a stress test that we developed. It's one thing to take the self-check and find out, whether or not you might be suffering from depression. It's another thing to think about what might be going on in your life that could potentially be contributing to that depression, or equally that may be impacted by the depression. And so that's what the stress test is about, to get a little bit more nuance and insight into about what's going on in your life that may be contributing or being impacted by depression. The take action section of the website, this is really the heart of the self-help aspect, understanding that guys really want to try to figure things out themselves as much as they can. So rather than trying to resist that and dissuade men from it, let's embrace it. Let's empower men to do things on their own that realistically can help them. So we go through practical tips, how to reach out to people, which is an important part of taking action of your own. We want to convey to guys that reaching out does not mean failure. It does not mean you're losing control. It does not convey weakness. I can't say those things strongly enough. Reaching out means you're actually taking action. You're building your team. You're building your resource and support team. You are fully in control. And we talk about the different kinds of professional services that you might engage with. And finally, we developed a therapist directory. So if you come to our site and you say, yeah, I really do need to reach out, I want to work with somebody so I can start living my best life, we now have a mechanism that can help you find somebody to work with. So if you click on, for example, the practical tips, we go through the main areas of a person's life that tend to be impacted by depression. So that's sleep and physical activity, our diet, social life, sex and relationships, and our capacity to manage stress. And so, for example, if you click on sleep, we talk about the different ways that depression can impact your sleep. One way is that, I just can't fall asleep. There's stuff that goes through my head over and over and over when I lay down. It just keeps me up. Or maybe if I fall asleep, I keep waking up repeatedly. Or similarly, I just can't get out of bed. And that's a really common one. And it's like, you might be able to sleep, you might have interrupted sleep, but you just can't drag yourself out of bed in the morning. So say, for example, you click on the can't fall asleep. We go through various tips about how you can work on your sleep hygiene to help increase the possibility of being able to go to sleep. The reaching out part, there's various mechanisms by which we can reach out when we're needing a hand. So whether that's talking to a friend or family member, anonymous health lines, you can consult a doctor, your family physician to get their help. If you're in a crisis situation, what does reaching out look like in that particular situation? As I mentioned, we have a therapist directory, or if you just don't know where to start, you can book a health consult, and that's actually with me. So if you say, I'd like to feel better and I'd like to work with somebody and willing to put the effort in, but I don't know where to start, you can start there. So if you click on, for example, consult a family doctor, we walk guys through the steps of, getting prepared, scheduling an appointment, preparing for the meeting, what to actually say during the meeting with your physician. And even if you don't know how to start that conversation, we'll actually give you the language. And sometimes it's really simple. You might go into your doc and you don't know what to say, and it's like, doc, I've been feeling like shit for a while. I don't know what's going on. If that's all you say, that's actually enough to get the conversation started. And no matter what you feel you're harboring inside that may cause your doc to look sideways or wonder if you're weird or different or something, forget about it. Whatever you've got going on, they've heard 1,000 times over. They're trained for this. This is a part of their job, and you just need to start that. And I'll give a little anecdote that actually preceded the development of this site, that speaks to the importance of talking, getting a conversation started, and you being in control of that conversation. I had a psychiatry resident. We were doing a survey study of men in family practice offices. So this resident was actually in the waiting room recruiting guys as they came in at various mental health questionnaires. One of the items that were part of the survey was, are you currently experiencing thoughts of suicide? Yes or no? And then we had guys, like, just minutes after they completed it, they went and saw their doc. We also asked the doc after the meeting, did the person bring up any issues around mental health? And more specifically, did the person bring up any issues around suicide? Yes or no? And so we found that there was just slightly under 10% of the guys indicated that they were experiencing thoughts of suicide in the waiting room. Not one of the guys brought it up with their physician. Now, remember, it was just minutes later. They're primed to think about it. Minutes later, they're talking to their physician and they didn't bring it up. And if you don't bring it up, the doc's not going to bring it up. So it's critically important to share that. So professional services, there's a lot of different kinds of professionals out there, and it can be confusing. So we talk about the different kinds of mental health professionals that you're likely to engage with. What's a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a social worker, counselor? Who are these people? And then we go through the main types of therapy or interventions that you would use to treat depression. And primarily it's talk therapy, the formal names, psychotherapy or counseling. There's medication, inpatient services for a crisis situation. So we go through what these things are. And talk therapy in particular, we point guys to, we really privilege this approach. And that's it because it is the most effective and also the one with the least side effects. Medications can be helpful, but the reality is the medications are actually only have an effect beyond placebo for a minority of patients. And that's really important to keep in mind. That's not to minimize their usefulness for some people, because for some people it's literally life-saving. So I want to make that clear. But psychotherapy in particular, this is very effective. And this really ought to be your first line treatment. When you're looking for help, look to talk to somebody. I can't stress that enough. And again, related to that, we have a therapist directory that spans Canada, the United States, United Kingdom. I believe we have Australia, New Zealand, and Ireland in there as well. So we cater to English-speaking countries, given it's an English-speaking resource. And so we have a lot of people on here, and we launched it roughly about a year ago, and thus far we've had over 10,000 connections between our visitors and therapists. So there's been tremendous take up of it. The next part where we have articles, and we got a ton of tip articles. So looking at specific aspects of depression, specific aspects of life affected by depression, and what you can do about it. And so here's just a couple of examples. The first one was actually a summary of a campaign that we did for World Suicide Prevention Day last year. The one on the bottom, how music can improve our mental health. So those are just some examples of articles that you'll find there. What you'll also find are real story blogs or articles and videos from real men who have shared their journey with depression and their journey toward recovery. And we have roughly 100 guys sharing their story, which is phenomenal. This is by far the world's largest repository of men sharing their story and their encouragement for recovery for other guys. And finally, the last section of the site is for family and friends, recognizing that for a lot of guys, if they do reach out for help, it's with somebody by their side, encouraging them to get that help. And we know that these folks play a tremendous role in men's lives, supporting them on their path to wellness. And so we want to provide support to these support people. And so what does providing support to a man who is dealing with depression actually look like? So a big aspect of that is shaping boundaries. Because one thing that's really important is that we need to understand what our role is and what our role is not. You're not a therapist, you're not their doctor. There's parameters around what you can do and what you can't do. So we provide people with that kind of information. Also, if suicide is an issue for the fellow, what does helping them manage suicide risk actually look like? And finally, emphasizing the importance of taking care of yourself. It can be hard to be a support person, whatever the health issue is. It can be hard. And if you're not in a good place yourself, you're certainly not going to be in a good place to be supportive of somebody else. So we emphasize taking care of yourself first and foremost, so that you can be the best supportive person possible. So that's a quick overview of what the site is. And, we're proud of the site, but, you can have the world's best website, but if no one goes to it, it's literally useless. So it's really important for us to understand how we're engaging people, whether we're engaging people. And since we launched in June 2015, we've had over 3.5 million people from around the world, not just Canada, from around the world come to the site. And currently we get about 65,000 people a month coming. We utilize social media across different channels quite actively. And we know that through different campaigns and promotions, we've been able to reach more than 20 million people. We've been very fortunate to get attention in the media to share our resource. And also there's a growing number of sites actually linking to us as a formal resource, often in the context of workplace mental health or other health resources linking to us specifically for men's mental health. I mentioned traffic from around the world. You can see through this graphic the distribution of traffic across the entire globe. You see Canada, US, Australia, India. India actually has an enormous English-speaking population through much of Europe, and not surprisingly, a large part from the UK. And in fact, the US and UK and Canada in that order are the top 3 places we get traffic. I mentioned age, and indeed what we're finding is that we've got just over 50% of the people who come to the site are 35 and under. So we're clearly hitting our target market, yet importantly, we're also getting men across the age spectrum, which is fantastic. Traffic by device, not surprisingly these days, most people are using a mobile device. And why that's important for us is because we actually developed this as a website. It's not an app, even though a lot of people refer to it as an app, it's not an app. So whatever we do must be responsive to how to the tool that people are engaging with to come to the site. So everything that we do on a desktop has to be responsive to mobile use as well. This is really useful information. So whenever we each go to Google and we type something in to search for it, and you go to a site, that site knows what you typed in to get there. So when people come to us by way of a Google search, which is called organic search traffic, we know what people are typing that bring them in. And Heads Up Guys is becoming more well-known, and so people are actually searching for us directly. If you take those top two out of the equation, look at the next 4. They all have something to do with suicidality, which is crucially important for us because that helps us know how people are engaging with us. People are wanting support, they're wanting help with regard to suicide specifically. There's other things as well, but those are really key factors for us to be aware of. I mentioned the screening tool, the self-check. We've had over 500,000 guys take this self-check, and what we found is that 3/4 of them are screening for probable depression. And in fact, just over 1/10 of the people who fill it out are actually indicating suicidality on a daily basis. We get about, this said 70, it's an old stat, it's more than that, it's more over 100 now. 100 times a day, people filling this out. It takes about 3 minutes to fill it out. And so what we can extrapolate from this is that we've had over 500,000 men take 3 minutes out of their day to think about and reflect on their own mental health while educating them about the symptoms of depression. And why this is important, because a lot of those men inevitably this is the first time that they've actually taken time to think about their own mental health. In the stress test, it's more like 75 times a day. It takes about 4 minutes to complete. And we've had about 70,000 guys fill this out. And what we have found, and this figure illustrates it, the 5 most commonly endorsed stressors by men, look at the first 2, loneliness and lack of purpose or meaning in life, more than 50% of each. That means more than half the guys who have filled out the stress test have indicated that loneliness and lack of purpose or meaning in life are key stressors in their life. Other stressors, financial strain, work difficulties, relationship challenges, those are pretty high too, maybe not as surprising, but certainly the first two I found a bit surprising for myself. And finally, I'll just leave you with this. We have an email account associated with the site. We get correspondence all the time, every day, from people who have come to the site. And this is other useful information for us, just again, reflecting on how people engage with us and whether or not they've actually found it helpful, which is critical for us to know. And I'll draw your attention down to the final one. Quote, it said, "I read your article on managing suicidal thoughts. We have many, but it doesn't matter. Thank you. I'm pretty sure it saved my life and gave me some hope for tonight." We have had so many responses just like this saying, "Thank you. You saved my life." And that is incredibly meaningful to us. It lets us know that we're doing good work and we're making a difference. And that's why we keep at it. And it's like, there, as I said at the beginning, there's not a lot out there for guys. And I'm not saying Heads Up Guys is going to fill the whole gap, but it's a start. And I encourage, whether it's for yourself or others that may be struggling, just send them along to the site and send the link saying, "Hey, came across the site, thought you might be interested in it." That could really make a massive difference to a person and set them on a completely new and positive trajectory. So I'll stop it there. Yeah, and we got lots of time for chit chat. And if you want to share any thoughts or comments you have, I'm all ears.
John, we've got that one question that came in on the website.
Okay, yep.
Let's answer that one. I was wondering if you could provide information or, sorry, I'm trying to do this small screen here. I was wondering if you could provide your information or thoughts surrounding chronic depression and the long-term treatment with antidepressants. At 43 years old, I've been on antidepressants since I was 14. I've not had luck finding this information, including scholarly searches. Thank you in advance.
Well, definitely medication use. Medications have some usefulness when dealing with depression. As I mentioned, it can be incredibly helpful for some people. Unfortunately, the way our medical system is structured, people will go to the family doc. Family docs that's trying to do something helpful and will immediately prescribe medication. But for the vast majority of people, this isn't actually what's needed. For those people who are really struggling, where depression is impacting their capacity to engage with life and get even basic things done, medication does have a really helpful role. It sort of helps you bring you closer to that equilibrium that you were at before, and it helps you engage in therapy. And so the combination treatment for a lot of folks is really important. For others, and I've encountered this many times, people are put on meds. Some it helped, many it didn't, but they're afraid to go off. And so for this gentleman, I've been, he's saying I've been on it for a very long time. There's a realistic fear, and it's like, well, if I go off, then what? Am I really going to be crashing down? If I've still struggle with depression while on medications, like, is it just going to be so profoundly worse? I can't imagine going off. And the reality is, for most people, if they're not doing well on medications, it's probably the medications aren't doing much. Now, I would say, sort of a cautionary point, if you're on medications and you're in therapy and you're engaged with the therapist, you've got a good working relationship, you do find some benefit, and it's still, still life can feel like a struggle, I wouldn't necessarily recommend going off the medications. However, if you're on medications and you find it really hasn't done much for you, chances are it's not going to do much for you. And I would strongly encourage you to reach out to a therapist and start working with somebody in that way.
Thank you, sir. Somebody else has commented here on the cultural stereotypes and gender stereotypes. Breaking the stigma of the stoic man is so hard, even when we know better. How can we overcome these cultural norms, stigmas, and stereotypes, especially in the workplace?
Well, that's a hard one. I know what the person means. You know, we may recognize the bullshit associated with a lot of these masculine norms, and it's like that's not me, that's not right. But we're afraid of how others are going to respond to us. And so I I tell people, it's like we need to take a risk on ourselves. Trying to hide, cover up, not disclose struggles that we're having doesn't make any of it better. And so why not take a risk on ourselves to reach out and get the support and help that we need? And I tell people, in all honesty, if you have people in your life that are going to demean you, belittle you, shame you because you've asked for a hand, I don't know if those are people you want in your life. In the workforce, that's a bit different. But again, you know, there are mechanisms in place in many workplaces, not all, but many, where there are supports in place. You know, talk to your HR manager and see what's available. You don't need to disclose to everyone that you're struggling. You be selective in who you share that information with. But the last thing I'll say is that with men in particular, you know, we often need permission from other guys to share, to reach out for a hand. And, you know, if you have to be the catalyst to get that happening, don't be afraid of how people will respond, but be optimistic about opening up channels for others. You know, so many times I've worked with guys and they say, I haven't told a soul. You're the only one I've talked to about this. This is over and over. And we talk about them reaching out to confidants in their life and sharing, and they're very afraid of it. And almost always they said, you know, that was such a relief to share. And I started sharing, and all of a sudden people started sharing with me, and I didn't expect that. And that made me feel really good. So we do need to take a risk on ourselves in order to get that help and support that we need.
I love that phrase, take a risk on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So this one is one that I probably get the most after any of my keynotes. I often get somebody, and typically a partner, asking the question, how do you get someone to seek help? And I know that's like, if there was a quick answer, man, holy.
I would love it. You know, I'd feel so smart. But there is no quick answer. What I would suggest, and I get this a lot too, as you might imagine, Mike, is that you have to find what motivates the person, find what matters to them, what has meaning, and then talk about support, getting help in the context of finding that meaning again. So let's just take, for the sake of example, we've got a guy and he's struggling with depression. As in typical guy fashion, we tend to retreat when we're not feeling good. We disengage from various aspects of life. And this guy was a hockey coach and he loved it. He loved working with the kids. It gave him a real sense of purpose and meaning in life, but he's not doing it anymore. And his wife may say, you know, Jim, you're not your normal self. You need to go and get some help. And he said, well, I don't want to. You have to appeal to those things that matter to him. It's like, Jim, I can see how, you know, being away from the kids and coaching, you know, that's something that was so meaningful to you, and you're not able to do that anymore. You've taken yourself out of that. And I know if you could get yourself back in there, how much that would elevate, you know, your engagement in life. And so the idea is try to find what matters to them and talk about engaging with help in that context.
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy. It's so important to, again, just try and find that catalyst to move them for support. I know I had someone in my life that struggled very badly. And I mean, I remember sitting in my car in front of the office, bawling my eyes out because I didn't know what to do. So I want to acknowledge how hard it is
Yeah.
to be that supportive person. I mean, and again, I love that we're having this conversation more and more, because for me, one of the things I did, I called, I think it was 811, the health link,
Mm-hmm.
and their answer was get them to go to the doctor. Well,
Yeah, that's not going to
that
work.
wasn't helpful, because unless they broke a leg, they weren't going to the doctor.
Yeah. Yeah. Another one, sometimes, as I'm working with people, or even before it's in that form of help seeking relationship, I ask guys, do you feel like you're getting the most out of life? Do you feel like you're thriving? Are you living your best life? And inevitably, it's a rhetorical question. It's no, I'm not. And it's like, don't you want to? Of course I do. Of course I do. What's getting in the way? Well, and so when you start talking about barriers that way, and it's like, what's getting in the way? And then you can try to work with them to overcome them. And also thinking about facilitators, what could help you get there? I'll be by your side. Let's do it together.
So any tips, because that takes a little bit of skill to be able to present that in a manner that doesn't feel like an attack. Like I can see your life sucks. Why don't you do something about it? Because I know that can be the interpretation, even though that's not what is meant.
So the prelude to that, so the context would be you would have to know the person well enough to approach them. The prelude is, Jim, you don't seem your normal self lately, and try to be specific. Try to share clear observations of what you mean by you don't seem yourself lately, so you can point it out, and then use that to then begin the conversation. And sometimes guys will, it's like, oh, finally somebody noticed, and they'll take that up. Other times, no, it's just I got a lot of things on my plate, and it's like, it's fine, it's okay. You have to let it go then. But what you've done is you've created an opening for it. And sometimes they'll loop back, or you loop back to them. And, more often than not, they're going to be in a worse place. And you could say, I'm concerned. Like I'm really concerned. What's going on? And so you leave it open like that to get the conversation. You don't want to, definitely, like you said, you do not want to ever present it like an attack. That's a surefire way of shutting them down.
Yeah, that's a great point. I really appreciate that. That was one of the things Wesley, one of our suicide attempt survivors, talked about yesterday that really hit me, is the fact that, most men won't seek help, but many will accept help. And it may, in my experience, it may take many times offering that help.
Yep.
But
Absolutely.
They will. Jen is asking, based on your experience, what system changes would you recommend to improve men's access to mental health supports?
Oh, that's a good question. I think one of the things that struck me is that when guys reach out to me for the first time, they'll often ask questions about, where are you located? They don't want to go to a hospital. And a lot of guys make that really clear. I don't want to go to a hospital. They don't want to go to somewhere that feels institutional. But if I say, well, my office is here, tell them where, and I'll say, my office or my practice is shaped largely to serve men. All of a sudden, it's like, okay, this is somebody who gets me. Or I'll offer to meet them online. And I have to say, perhaps one of the silver linings of COVID is the use of online platforms to be able to deliver therapy services, because now the vast majority of people I see are online because they are nowhere physically close to me. And I get people in their garage, in their truck, on a work site, going for a walk, in their basement. all over, and I'm quite certain that few, if any, of these guys would have ever stepped foot in my office. And so I think, with regard to system changes, making therapy more accessible, whether it's through use of technology or creating physical spaces that are catered to men, to give them essentially what they feel is a safe and comfortable place. And on a higher level than that, making therapy part of the public health system where all therapy services are covered. Right now, whether it's MSP in BC, Alberta Healthcare, therapy services are covered by the provincial system only if delivered by a psychiatrist. Now, there just are not enough psychiatrists to meet the demand. There are a lot of other service providers, whether they're clinical psychologists or counselors, that provide therapy. Might be covered a little bit under extended health if you have that through work, but inevitably is not going to be able to cover all of a person's treatment. That's not right. A person's full treatment ought to be covered by our provincial health system. So that's my little rant around system changes.
Oh, that's important. And I love what you say about, just for me, it's about creating the spaces. And that, I mean, that's what we're doing tonight. That's why
Yeah.
we've created this conference, so we can create the spaces. I always joke, there's this myth that men don't want to talk about their feelings, but the truth is, if we create the space, and I mean, you must know this better than anyone, if we create the space, oftentimes you can't shut us up.
Well, you're absolutely right. We do need to change the narrative that guys don't want help and they don't want to talk. We actually have data saying the complete opposite. We've actually asked guys, we had a survey of nearly 1,000 guys, I think, and we asked them in a hypothetical sense, and then also guys who are actively seeking help, both groups of guys, for what you. So the first one, the hypothetical, if you're experiencing a problem like depression, for example, which would you prefer for treatment? And we gave them options. For guys who are actively looking, we asked them, what would you prefer for treatment? Psychotherapy was just the overwhelming majority. And so this idea that guys don't want to talk just isn't right. Guys do want to talk, but they want to feel comfortable. They want to feel safe. They don't want to feel shamed or belittled. And I think creating those male-specific places is really important to overcome those kinds of barriers.
Yeah, I love that. One more question, and again, this kind of circles back to what we've already touched on, and so I don't know if there's an answer, but the question again is, what do you do when a man disengages from a romantic relationship? You bring your concerns about the signs of depression, and he just won't do anything.
Again, a tough one, and that one you have to speak about the relationship and you missing him. And it's like, rather than saying, I think you're depressed and you need to go fix yourself, which honestly isn't going to work for a lot of guys. You can say, I'm missing you. I'm missing the old Jim. I know something's not right. I don't know what that is, but I know you're not your normal self, and you're not here for us in our relationship in the way that I know you were. And I feel it's growing apart because of that. And it scares me, it frightens me. And so being able to appeal to that affective part of the guy, like a guy, as I mentioned earlier, we tend to withdraw from so many things in life when we're not doing well, including our relationships. And that's not an active choice saying, I'm done with this stuff, forget about it. It's a way to protect ourselves from being perceived as weak or vulnerable, protect ourselves from the shame that we may feel. But the reality is, we need to be able to engage with people, engage their support, so that we can use it to get stronger and healthier and live better lives.
I love that and again, this is where I was going earlier, just the skill portion or having the vocabulary, like the way you phrase that. I think that's brilliant, because that doesn't feel like an attack. And
No.
Clint Malarchuk talked about that last
Mm,
night, the difference between the real Clint and the illness.
yeah.
And just understanding, for him, that was a big revelation, understanding that they're two different things.
And that's actually really important. And one of the things that actually gets guys reaching out and engaging with help is making that distinction. I may be feeling depressed, but I'm not a depressed guy. What's happening to me isn't me. That's not my normal self. I don't like being like this. I want to get rid of it. And if I need to get some support to do that, God damn it, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, and for him, that was exactly what he said. When somebody had said that to him, that was his light bulb moment.
Yep.
And that made all the difference in the world.
Yep.
If there's any other questions, friends, drop them in the Q&A there, and I will read them out. Is there anything else important that you think folks should take away from tonight?
Well, I think we got to a lot of those important points through the questions, but to reiterate maybe what I just said before is that if we're struggling, we need people by our side. By nature, humans are social animals. We need people by our side. And depression in particular is such a beastly illness, is that if we try to tackle it on our own, it will inevitably get the better of us. We need supports in place, whether that's friends and family, your family doc, especially a mental health professional, maybe people from your spiritual community. You need those supports. And I tell guys, this is like building your team. So think of you as a general manager of the hockey team. You're trying to put your Stanley Cup winning group together. It's the same thing. This is my support team that I'm building for myself on my own, so I can be the best version of myself, so I can thrive.
Yeah, I love that. That was our last conversation. I think you gave me that little tidbit, and I've really, really used that, because I think it's such a powerful metaphor. Like, who's on your team? Because to your point, I mean, most of us guys, we don't have much of a team.
Right.
Or we have the team that we go play hockey with, but that's about it. All right, friends, I got a couple of thank yous, and it doesn't look like we've got any other questions.
Okay.
So, John, thank you once again for showing up for guys. And I so appreciate the way you show up, like just being able to have these conversations, being able to share the type of language that you found effective and give to others. And the website is headsupguys.org, correct?
Correct.
headsupguys.org. All right, John, thank you so much for being here. And friends, we are back tomorrow night. If you are in the Edmonton area, we are going to be live at Blackjack's Roadhouse. I've got appetizers, we've got drinks, we've got all kinds of things. And then when we are done our sessions, there will be a live band at Blackjack. So if you are in the Edmonton area tomorrow night, I will send out another email, but tomorrow night we are at Blackjack's Roadhouse. I will be attempting to broadcast live from there. So hopefully everything goes well. It's nice and easy when I'm in my studio here because everything's set up and ready to go. But that's it for night 2 of Love Letter to Men. Thanks for being here, friends. We'll see you tomorrow night.
All right. Thanks, Mike. And thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you, sir. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.